Well, hello everyone, and welcome to one more of 𝐻�0's webinars. And today we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Bridget. Hi, Dr. Bridget. Good morning. How are you today?
Good morning. Great.
Awesome. Dr. Bridget is calling in from Oregon. She's a 𝐻�0 user and runs an integrative medicine clinic where they've been using both resting and active metabolic rate testing, as well as many of our services in order to guide their patients to better health. And today, Dr. Bridget is going to be talking about how they're using 𝐻�0, what are the different services they're actually implementing. And at the end, we're also going to dive into a few reports and walk you guys through the different metrics that are included in the reports and maybe dive a little bit more into the science of the test and how we derive the insights that we provide and the output given to clients. Dr. Bridget, thank you so much for being with me here today. And floor is yours. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your clinic, and maybe 𝐻�0?
Okay, great. Well, thanks for taking some time to chat. I think there's just so much information these days that I feel like my patients are maybe at information overload. And so I love the idea of giving some really clear objective markers to help them be more successful. So I started my practice about 20 years ago. We have evolved quite a bit. So when you're first in practice, just out of school, maybe you rely more on lab tests and, you don't have the experience to really put the pieces together. And after 20 years of being in medicine, not only have I seen quite a bit of changes in people's health, which is concerning because our genetics can only change so fast. So clearly there's some environmental factors that are really affecting us, and lifestyle factors. And so I've seen changes in lab results and just overall metabolic health. So at our clinic, I kind of have FOMO about medical science. So I go to a lot of conferences. So sort of obsessively so. And what that means is I'm exposed to a lot of different treatment ideas, and we have a lot of tools here to help improve people from their metabolic health, their hormones, their gut health, microbiome. So we do really extensive testing and we have extensive treatment options. It takes more than it did 20 years ago to help people feel better in general, but there's also some really easy things people can do every day. So we're in Lake Oswego, Oregon. We absolutely love what we do here. It's really fun. Our staff, we try to practice really hard what we preach. So it's really
Mhm.
exciting.
Um, Before we go into the details about 𝐻�0 and how you guys are using the system and the services, can you talk a little bit more about the different services and the treatments you provide, and maybe talk a little bit about their popularity and what people are asking for, but then on the other side, a little bit about the efficacy. So
Mhm.
what you have seen to be the most effective, because from my experience, talking to clinics of all sorts all the time that range the entire gamut from fitness all the way to deep medical. There's always this dichotomy between what customers want and what's actually effective. So
Mhm.
if you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great topic and question and ask.
Yeah.
Mm, I would say, I mean, in general, what people want is for most part is an easy solution, right? It's not a slam on human nature, but we want to feel better faster, and we want it to be easy, and that's probably partly why big pharma got such a hold on our culture. Um, so people I'm finding more and more now are really wanting to get to the root cause of what's happening more than ever.
Mhm.
It's more in media, it's more talked about. So to get to the root cause, we really have to unearth a lot of lifestyle things, but to get people to really have the energy and motivation to make those lifestyle changes, they have to feel better first. And if we can get them quickly feeling better, they're more likely to be successful using 𝐻�0 results and stuff like that. So I can't tell someone to just start weightlifting 5 days a week if they're super tired and they feel awful. So we do things like microbiome testing to get their gut microbiome really optimal. We do things like balance hormones, especially for postmenopausal women and men that are aging, if your estrogen's tanked, if your testosterone's tanked, it's extremely difficult to build muscle mass and improve your metabolic health.
100%. Yeah.
And, just because you're 60 doesn't mean you don't deserve optimal testosterone. But then we have to backpedal to why is it low in the first place? So we can't just kind of band-aid it and give you hormones without working on all the endocrine disruptors that's causing that. So we're balancing hormones, we're working on your gut. We're using things like hyperbaric oxygen chamber to give you more energy, to work towards longevity, to help heal tissue better, improve brain health function. We're doing things like ozone therapy to really help with antimicrobial effects, immune modulation, mitochondrial fitness energy. We use things like methylene blue with photobiomodulation, which is methylene blue with red light therapy. We use far-infrared saunas. We use, I'm drinking hydrogen water right now, so we use hydrogen water. We also have, if we think about optimal health, we have to manage stress. So we have an amazing esthetician with 20 years of experience, and we use all non-toxic products. But she also does sound bowl and Reiki. So she really helps people to de-stress because that's a huge problem these days. Those are probably some of our main things that we do. Our
100%.
website.
But the way the way you described it, I think it's one of the, few times, if not the first time, that someone is describing all of these services the way you did, which is that they are effectively an on-ramp to real lifestyle changes. Like, lifestyle changes need to happen. You need to lift, you need to eat like a normal person, you need to do your cardio, you need to sleep well. These are sort of like non-negotiable things, but in order to get someone to adhere to these things, we're using all of these sort of longevity modalities. That's how, our industry refers to them these days, in order to get people to feel better. It's like this initial boost that's going to get the flywheel to sort of turn, so that the lifestyle changes can start to happen, because now the person feels better. They're more open and more willing to make changes, but then it's the real lifestyle changes that will eventually get the flywheel to actually spin sustainably and at a good pace. That's how I'm understanding it, at least.
Yeah, I love you're good at analogies. I think that's really helpful for patients.
I'm
Or,
an engineer, that's why I
yeah,
have to teach myself how to explain things to people, because if my engineering brain opens up, no one is going to understand anything.
I think the analogies are so key because it really helps us to understand. And I think, I often mention to my patients, think about the last potluck you went to. What are the adults doing and what are the kids doing? The adults are sitting around eating and drinking, and the kids are typically running around. So just to think about, a lot of my patients in their 40s, 50s, 60s don't recognize their activity difference from when they were younger. So, tracking steps is an easy thing to do. And a lot of my patients struggle to get 2,000 to 3,000 steps in a day. So sometimes it's because they have joint pain in their knee. So we can inject ozone in their knee, or we can do hyperbaric chamber with a laser on their knee. Because if we can get, or even IV ozone really helps with joint pain. So if we can get their knee pain better, well, I can shoot up their steps to like 10,000. So if I can get their steps to 10,000, I get their mood a lot better, and then I get their sleep better. And now they're stoked because they can start taking on more lifestyle changes.
No,
Yeah.
100%. I totally agree with that. Thanks for the background on everything. Let's move on to Pnoe, and how you're using the system, how is the data valuable, and then I think what a lot of people in the audience would like to hear is what kind of patients, what's the profile that you're using Pnoe on?
I think the thing that I love about Pnoe is we have all this objective data, and we'll show you later, you're going to show us later in these cool graphs formats. And there's something about, I don't think you can unsee good and not good results. So like when you see those test results, some of them are surprising. Some feel good to see, and some are like, oh shoot, I thought mine would have been better. So it's a really great way to have some objective goals to strive for. Because if you come in for labs and your labs are fine, the standard labs are really underwhelming to get towards optimal health. So we started using Pnoe, and I'd say our biggest demographic is probably women, men and women like 40 to 60 years old. They're starting to notice changes in their fitness level. They're starting to have more aches and pains. They're starting to want to really improve their health. And they get all this data and they're super stoked to say like, okay, now what do I do with this? How do I get this better? So that's probably our main group that's using it.
And I really have to highlight that for people, like, what Dr. Bridget is describing is probably the main reason why most people out there are using Pnoe. It's a very powerful motivating factor, showing people root cause data around what is causing their um, uh, languid feeling, or what is causing them to have low energy levels, or what's causing, some sort of like chronic issue, is vital when it comes to get someone to implement fundamental lifestyle changes. You can be talking to people all you want, but if you bring this sort of like third party authority that is providing you with an objective view of your body, I guess humans are conditioned to approach and respond to this third party authority in a very different way, right? And so it becomes a motivational factor. And then it becomes very much an educational factor. This is what I have seen to be extremely powerful, which is that ultimately people will respond to stimuli, and people will be much more likely to adhere to changes when they understand why they're doing something. And so when you present them with an image of the main functions of their body, and you explain to them how things work, and you explain to them why something is breaking down, or is completely broken down, then they are much more likely to follow what you're telling them, because now they understand. It's exactly the same, approach we typically have with kids, right? The healthy approach is to explain to the kid, why they need to do something, instead of just, providing them with an ultimatum and not really explaining why, how things work. So
Yeah.
ultimately the report, and as we're going to see later on, sort of serves like I like to call it biology one-on-one session, where
Mhm.
people start to understand how the main functions in their body are working.
Mhm.
This is with regards to the test. Can you talk a little bit about how the follow-up process is structured? What is typically the upselling mechanism for other things? How are you weaving the test into other modalities or other flows that you have in your clinic? Because a lot of the people out there are, wondering, I'm bringing something new. How do I weave it in, and how do I integrate it with the rest of the stuff that I have?
Yeah. It's a little bit difficult actually. I find, first patients are coming in and we're kind of putting out fires. So we're working
Hmm.
on the acute stuff.
Hmm.
And then and then we can get to the peeling back the layers of the onion to get to more longevity medicine, metabolic health. So then we can do the Pnoe testing.
Hmm.
Um, and then we have that data, and then we can say, okay, here's the reason why these markers are important. Here's how this is correlated to longevity. And we combine that with more extensive lab testing also, right? And so then we go through that and we say, okay, here's the treatments that can help you feel better faster, and here's why. And then we set them on a plan of, okay, we're going to repeat these labs in this many months. We're going to repeat the Pnoe testing in this many months. And in the meantime, you'll be doing these treatments. So we just spell out a plan for them and make sure that that works for them, right? So it has to not be financially stressful, and it has to not be too time stressful for them. Um, and a lot of the treatments, you just sit back and relax and you feel a lot better anyway. So it's a pretty passive, easy thing to do to get started.
Hmm.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's a good answer. As far as like your business model, if you can talk about it, of course, like, how does it, how is everything working? Not just specifically to Pnoe, but in general, like, is it a subscription basis? Is it like a, you know, um, sort of like a la carte, picking different items and, getting bundles? Like, how do you structure things? Because that's another area where people are looking to get advice and see what's happening elsewhere.
Mhm. We're slowly evolving to a more year program approach because we really want people to be successful and committed to improving their
Mhm,
health.
mhm,
Right now, it's more a la carte, but
mhm,
the more and more data we collect, it really needs to be something people can commit to, and
mhm,
it's really reasonably priced to do the things that we're talking about. So, you can compare going out to dinner a couple nights a month. Instead of
mhm.
doing that, you focus on your metabolic health. It would be less expensive than 2 dinners a month,
Oh
you
yeah,
know? So
100%.
if we try to really help people
Mhm,
kind of compare those expenses.
mhm,
So right now, the doctor guides the patients to pick and choose what would be the healthiest option
mhm,
for them.
mhm,
And then we're slowly evolving that into a more designed program, what would be easier for patients just to like show up and do the
mhm,
stuff.
mhm,
So
mhm,
right now we have a few options. Yeah.
mhm. And are you thinking about like 6-year commitments, 12-year commitments? Like, how are you thinking about it?
Really a year at a time. I think
Oh.
to really see a shift, I mean, you can see a shift in 3 months. If you
Mhm,
dedicate 3 months, you can most definitely see changes in your sleep, energy, overall health, hands down.
mhm.
Um, but in a year, you're really going to see a pretty massive difference in your overall health markers.
No,
Yeah. But
100%,
we have
100%.
like we have, I can't tell you how many times we have patients with pre-diabetes. So, their hemoglobin A1C might be 5.8, 5.9, 6.2. And I'm not trying to slam Western medicine, but their PCP will say, well, just watch what you eat. And then what happens is in a year, that number is way worse. So when we see those numbers, we're rechecking them every 3 months, not once a year. And then we're pushing them really hard to make changes with their blood sugars. And people don't realize things like hydrogen water helps, things like ozone, hyperbaric
Mhm,
oxygen chamber, lifting weights,
mhm,
huge for changing blood sugars. And so we consistently see blood sugars change rapidly and get them
mhm,
out of prediabetes. So
mhm.
those things are like in 3 months.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
very significant changes can happen even more drastically. Like we've seen, obviously, cases of very committed people who go from 0 to 60, improve their view to max by, 10 points, which is like,
Wow.
30%.
Yeah.
That ultimately, if you compare that to biological age difference, that is basically reducing your biological age by 15 years in about a month to a month and a half. All of that is very possible. It really depends on, how much work and effort you're putting in, but it goes without saying that, if you start implementing a workout regimen where you're training, 5 times a week, and all of a sudden you clean up your nutrition and you eat, lots of clean proteins, vegetables, and fruits, yeah, there's absolutely no reason why you're not going to see this massive improvement, not in 3 months, but in a month and a half.
Yeah.
That goes back to my point about education. When people understand that, this is how my body is working, and so if I do that, I'm actually going to see massive changes, then, some people actually do it.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't expect the majority to go from 0 to 60, but, 0 to 30 is still a lot. And, 0 to 30 means that, we're going to get to these massive changes, not in a month and a half, but in 4 months or 5 months. But still, that's a huge win for a lot of people out there, right?
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
where the PNOE testing and just overall metabolic testing can be so amazing because we know, okay, what's your insulin numbers? What's your sugars? Can you do sit to stand test? What's your body fat? We check all that stuff. Uh, all these lab markers, like even as simple as GGT as a blood test is almost never run. It's a liver enzyme. When it's really high, often people are drinking a lot of alcohol, but even when it's not optimal, it's strongly correlated to mortality risk. And so
Yeah.
and that test is, I think it's about $8. It's like a super cheap test.
Yeah.
And so I
Does that
think,
scan for NAFLD?
what's that?
Does that scan for NAFLD?
Oh, it's a signal of fatty
Non-alcoholic
liver.
liver fatty
Yeah.
disease?
Yeah,
Okay.
it definitely can help indicate that. And then
Okay.
so like when you're looking at things like some really simple lab tests, I can say, well, this isn't optimal. And then I think the one thing about the PNOE testing I think is super cool is it's actually how you're using your oxygen and CO2. It's not a guess, which is really cool. So I want to ask you a bit later about different zones and the accuracy
Yeah,
of
yeah,
PNOE versus
100%.
just
Yeah.
guessing. But
Hmm.
when I look at like another thing patients really don't understand, and a lot of doctors don't understand. So
Hmm.
like if I worked at Kaiser and I've only worked at Kaiser, I know those reference ranges, but we order labs from a bunch of different companies. And so one, reference ranges have changed over the years, which is kind of wild. That's a whole nother conversation. Like, why are we adjusting our reference ranges to a sicker population versus an optimal population? And
Oh,
then,
100%. Yeah. The
and then
ranges are no longer useful if you ask me at
it's
all. Like
it's
zero,
wild,
zero. It's garbage, completely, complete
wild.
garbage. Yeah. Yeah.
So like, why aren't our reference ranges, you know, why aren't we comparing ourselves to people in blue zones that are living, more people are living to 100?
Yeah.
Those should be our reference ranges. And then, so we tighten those reference ranges based on research. So we really help people get towards optimal health. And then it's
Hmm.
it's really difficult for patients because at one lab they're flagged high with something, and another lab it's within normal. And then I'm
Yep.
also saying, throw all that out. Let's
Yeah.
actually just optimize these as well. So it's a
Hmm.
lot of data to go through. Um, but that's why we basically, chip away at it every month. We just keep chipping
Hmm.
away at all this data. It's not something that we're going to get through all of it in a month. Um,
Hmm.
but it's really compelling to show people feel they have so much better understanding about what's happening in their body when they can see this objective testing. It's really cool.
100%. So
Yeah.
since we're talking about the objective testing and the data, I'm gonna, share my screen and I'm gonna walk people through the um, RMR report to start
Mhm.
with. You can see my screen, right?
Yep.
Awesome.
And you could, and this is my report, right?
Yeah, that's yours.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
can you can fully slam my metabolic health right now. My
It wasn't
excuse,
it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. I
so
mean,
people always say, people
yeah, there.
always say when they're doing the active test, it's always like, I think I could have done better. I think I could do better. And so,
Yeah.
and then,
Yeah.
and then my excuses is my excuses are I had several musculoskeletal injuries because
Oh.
I really love sports and being outside. And I
Mhm.
had so many injuries in a year that I was like, well, this is great. I'm going to start my PNOE testing at like my worst metabolic health that I've had in the last like probably 20 years. So then I'm
Yeah.
assuming it'll be really easy to make some improvements. So that's what's cool.
Yeah, your low point isn't that bad to begin with. But yeah, the good thing with nature is that it works in logarithms, right? So initially the rate of change is fast, but then as we head towards excellency, it's difficult to keep pushing the boundary. Mother Nature is, trying to hold us back. But anyways, so for everyone, this is sort of the first page of the report, the name of the patient, the objective, the type of test. There's the resting and the exercise test. And then, in the intro page, we have the different areas of physiology that we assess through breath analysis. And we have this there so that people understand that breath analysis, unlike what most people think, is not just about measuring calories and VO2 max. It's actually an assessment of all of these critical biological areas. And in the overview page, which is basically the crux of the report, we're looking at these areas of physiology arranged in a schematic that sort of conveys to the reader the bidirectional connection between all of these systems. So that, again, to my point before, people start to understand how things work under the hood. To begin with, we have sympathetic and parasympathetic activation. That shows us how much the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system is activated. And that is very much dependent on the way you breathe because of how the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems are connected on your lungs. The sympathetic system is connected in the upper part, the parasympathetic in the lower part. And so when you have people who have abnormalities in their breathing, they are chest breathers, they breathe too fast or too irregularly, what they're going to end up doing, irrespectively of, not sleeping or working out a lot or drinking alcohol or accumulating allostatic load in whatever way, Just by breathing incorrectly, you can very much stimulate your parasympathetic and downregulate your parasympathetic, which is going to put you in a bad state overall.
Panos, can I ask you a question?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So for that marker, do you feel like, what have you seen as the most compelling change that someone can make to improve that marker? And how much do you feel your lifestyle of daily stress is affecting that marker? Because that's affecting how you're breathing, correct?
Great question. So when it comes to this marker, it's like two pillars that feed into it. One is the breathing part. Your breathing and the way you breathe, the mechanics of the breathing are extremely important. And then the next pillar is going to be lifestyle. And then lifestyle is, everything you can think of, from drinking alcohol to not sleeping enough to sleeping badly to working out too much, et cetera, et cetera. If your breathing is good, and your breathing is very good. I wanted to ask you, like, do you do yoga or breath work or any of that? It shows. It shows. And I have to highlight that most people who do the test are poor breathers in some capacity. And in almost every case, when we run into someone who is not necessarily like a master in breath work, but does breath work regularly and is mindful of maintaining proper breathing, like, all of these markers are great. So when sympathetic and parasympathetic activation is off and breathing is very good, then it pretty much shows that it's all the lifestyle stuff that needs fixing. And it may also be something transient, right? If you just go through a phase where you may be on vacation, but you're hiking and you're, like, doing insane, like, physical exertion, yeah, you're gonna end up, building up a lot of allostatic load. But once you go back 3, 4 days later, you should be fine. The thing
And
that worries us is if it's a breathing issue, and it's systemic, right? It has nothing to do with a transient lifestyle factor.
can you,
Um,
Panos, can you describe allostatic load? Because I think your brain may be a little bit different than the average person listening to this as far as
Yeah,
definition.
Sorry about that. Sometimes I take some terminologies for granted. So allostatic load is sort of like the a cumulative net effect of your psychological and psychosomatic stress. So if you're exerting a lot of physical effort and then you're going through a lot of, stressful moments, that is, ultimately represented and results to the so-called allostatic load, which is presented in how much the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems are activated. It's sort of like the gauge of how much stress your nervous system is incurring. And it's still TBD the extent to which, actually the degree to which the psychological and the psychosomatic component contribute to it. There's scientists who believe that the psychosomatic is much more powerful. There's others that believe that the psychological is much more powerful, but ultimately the net effect is what you're seeing here.
Thank you.
Then we have the three main respiratory metrics, right? We have the ventilation efficiency, we have breathing coordination, and then lung utilization. Ventilation efficiency looks into how efficiently oxygen is absorbed and CO2 is discharged within the lungs. So it's basically a marker of ventilation efficiency that looks into the health of the lungs from within. And cases where this marker, this variable is low, would be cases where someone has some sort of respiratory issue. So asthma, COPD, sleep apnea would be, a very big one here. When we see ventilation efficiency trending below 60%, most of the times we are, right about calling sleep apnea out or something related to that. So very, very important to track this metric. I would say that out of the three main systems, lung, heart, and cells, which is what a metabolic testing like PNOE analyzes, lungs and breathing is typically the area where we see the most deficiencies. And also, the breathing component is very, very important because it's going to regulate oxygenation across the entire body. It's going to regulate the oxygen delivery capability of our blood. And ultimately, when breathing is not good, what's going to end up happening is your blood, through the Bohr effect, basically how tightly oxygen gets connected into hemoglobin, through the Bohr effect, that's what's that going to do is it's going to reduce the amount of oxygen being delivered across the body. And the organ that gets hit the most is the brain. And that's why there's a very high degree of correlation between neurodegeneration and bad breathing. So bad breathers are in a very, very high risk of developing at some point in life neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, and so on and so forth. And I would say out of the breathing issues that is potentially the most dangerous one is by far sleep apnea, right? Because you're depriving your brain of very valuable oxygen during sleep, which is when, all the cleaning up of the brain takes place. Next one, breathing coordination. That marker looks outside of the lungs. It looks into the respiratory apparatus, the mechanics of the breathing. So how well the rib cage is going inside and outside, and then how well the diaphragm is going up and down. And so when someone has proper breathing frequency in terms of its level, so how many breaths you're taking per minute, but then also when your breathing frequency is pretty steady and doesn't fluctuate a lot, it means that you have good coordination of your breathing muscles, which is very, very important. And then obviously when you're in the lower end of the breathing rate spectrum, but not too low, we don't want to go too low because you're hypoventilating, which has other side effects. But when you're in a nice between 9 and 12 breaths per minute, it's also a very good indicator that you're engaging the diaphragm effectively. Next up, we're looking at lung utilization. We're actually measuring how much volume of air you're pushing out per breathing cycle. Very important to make sure that your lung sacs are being engaged and you're using them. Lung sacs that are not being utilized are basically huge liabilities for the body. The reason why a lot of people die of pneumonia in hospitals is because they don't utilize their lungs. And that's why they give you this thing to blow, the 3 balls, right? Doctors give you this in order to make sure that you engage the muscles, because muscles that are being idle are basically sources for viruses and ultimately disease. Next up, we have the metabolic component. Sorry, we have the heart fitness, which, in your case, pretty good. Do you do cardio? What kind of exercise routine do you typically follow?
Yeah, I did. So I did about 12 years of 3 to 5 days a week of CrossFit, and then 5 to 6 soccer games a week, and then
Oh, wow.
kayaking and paddleboarding and stuff. I had total delusions of grandeur. Not that I did all of those things well, but I just like being active. I definitely, peaked out on how much strength I could develop. I don't build a lot of muscle, but then I moved and it interrupted that. And then I got back into it. And then I had an injury, it interrupted that. So in the last couple years, I couldn't do nearly the weightlifting that I wanted to do. It was very intermittent, which will be interesting when you see a later recommendation for me. It was so spot on. But I tend to do quite a bit of cardio and soccer games and play tennis and hiking and stuff like that.
Nice. Good. Cool. And then metabolic rate, which is the last part of the equation. So, as I said, breath analysis looks into 3 main systems: lungs, heart, and cells. In the cell, we're basically analyzing 3 main attributes. One is metabolic rate. So this is how fast or slow your metabolism is. If you're at 50%, it means you're burning what is predicted. If you're at more than 50%, it means you're burning more than the average person with the same age, gender, and overall size. Yours is good. We want that to be as high as possible. A high metabolic rate is an indication that you have a good amount of muscle, but also from an endocrine perspective, your muscle is working well. Also, a low metabolic rate is a very, very high risk, a very important risk factor for injuries. So when people start to see declining metabolic rate, especially athletes who may be going through periods of overtraining, when they see metabolism declining, it means that, down to a cellular level, some mechanisms that are very important for recovery are not being conducted effectively, and as a result, that may lead to injuries. So super important to measure metabolic rate, not just to, provide calorie recommendations, but also as a, as an indicator of overall health. Then we have fat burn efficiency that looks into how efficiently you're burning fats and carbohydrates. One of the things that breath analysis measures is how efficiently and how many grams actually of fats and carbs you're oxidizing. And by measuring this at rest and in a fasted condition, you can understand how well your mitochondria are able to use fat as a fuel source. Because supposedly when you're in a fasted state, there isn't, immediate carbohydrate available for the body. So cells need to be able to switch into fat burning mode. And this is a direct proxy metric, not a direct, but a direct proxy. This difference I'll explain for analyzing mitochondrial function. So the more mitochondria you have, and the rounder the mitochondria, and the bigger the mitochondria, the more fat you're going to be able to burn, and the healthier the cell is going to be. It's very difficult to actually measure mitochondrial function. If you want to measure it directly, you need to do mass spectroscopy, which is, very advanced procedures that are not even commercially available. We do that in research. We basically need to put cells under the microscope. And so what we can do is we can measure variables that are directly related to their function. And the most fundamental function that mitochondria perform is bringing in oxygen, using it to oxidize fats and carbs, and then releasing CO2. And that's why, by measuring fat and carbohydrate oxidation by looking into O2 and CO2 exchange, we're basically able to understand how well mitochondria are working. And from that metric, you can also derive something that's called metabolic flexibility, which is how efficiently you can switch between fats and carbs. Whenever we become metabolically inflexible and we stop being able to transition to fat burning mode when there isn't enough or at all available carbohydrates, then we start to develop what's called metabolic inflexibility. And ultimately, through various mechanisms, that becomes the starting point of metabolic disorder. So even before we start seeing elevated fasting blood glucose levels, we will start to see signs of metabolic inflexibility. So also very, very important element to track. Mm-hmm. And then we have a dedicated page for every metric we sort of covered, and then some recommendations that have to do with exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle. We go into much greater detail in the application. We have a separate service where we can deliver a fully personalized and detailed exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle program. And we obviously keep those separate so that there is an opportunity for an upsell, depending on the business model of the affiliate. Let me see how I can.
And I can, while you're pulling something up,
yeah,
it's just so amazing, like how much data you can pull out of a test that takes, less than an hour, way less than an hour to do both tests.
Yeah.
And then we do recommend the metabolic consult with Pnoe, so that they get really expert explanation of what all these metrics mean. So myself, the other doctors here, and my staff can help you improve those numbers. But then Pnoe has been really great at explaining, what does all this mean? What can you extract from this? So I think that's a really important aspect that you guys offer, is that metabolic consult's been really helpful.
100%. We started offering this because we saw the need to be able to standardize the experience for the end consumer and make sure that they get the, full-blown and fully detailed explanation of what's happening. We do provide a lot of education. The majority of our customers actually want to undertake consultations themselves, and so we need to train them. And we do provide a lot of education, but then also we do give them pointers, when they do the test and, they need some sort of cheat sheet in order to have bullet points and focus the conversation accordingly. We do provide that as well. Switched over to the AMR test, similar layout for the metrics here. Slightly different metrics. You see VO2 peak, for instance, some differences in the ventilation and respiratory metrics, a big difference in oxygen circulation, which is a major cardiovascular metric, very important one to understand cardiovascular fitness through that metric. And additional markers for cellular function as well. I'm not going to go through everything now because it's sort of like extensive, but if you have questions about the metrics or if you want to dive deeper in the reports, you can schedule some time with us. I just want to fast forward to the biological age page we have here. So VO2 max, whether measured directly through the exercise test or extrapolated from the resting test. The extrapolation from the resting test is obviously not as accurate as doing the full-blown test on a bicycle or a treadmill, but it's maybe 80 to 90% there. So good enough accuracy to give you an understanding of whether you're beating the clock or if the clock is beating you. And in your case, we're obviously using your measured VO2 max, and you're beating the clock by 10 years. So congratulations. The reason why VO2 max is considered probably the best indicator for longevity in biological age is because if we go back to this chain, right, the lungs, the heart, and the cells, VO2 max is the global KPI, key performance index, that sits atop that entire chain. So you can think of these three systems as pipes, right? It's three pipes connected to each other. If you start breaking one or more of these pipes, what you're going to end up having is you're going to have leakages, right? So you have less oxygen that can flow through the combined pipe. And so if you have very big and very solid pipes, then you can push a lot of oxygen down into your cells and you can clear a lot of CO2. And ultimately, this is why a high VO2 max is a good indicator of the fact that your lungs and then your heart and then your blood circulation and then your cells are all working well in unison. If things start to break down, that's going to be reflected in a lower VO2 max and then a slight increase in biological age. But then the beauty of breath analysis is that it's not only global in its assessment, it can also be specific. It can tell you based on the submetrics that we have where the problem lies. Is it the lungs, is it the heart, or is it the cells? And that's why it can be very prescriptive as well, both in terms of nutrition, training, and other modalities. And then to your
Can I ask you a quick question about that? Okay, so we have a little competition with our patients and myself about biological age. So far I have two patients that are 14 years younger. What's instead of mine's 10, what's the biggest difference you've seen, higher and lower?
Yeah, I think -15 is sort of like the limit of what one can achieve. So yeah, these two folks must be pretty solid for their age, right?
What's the highest above your chronological age?
I think +15 or +16 is
Wow.
yeah. We see some of these as well, unfortunately.
And then did I hear you say, I think I listened to you in another interview, that you bounce around high 50s to low 60s in your VO2 max?
Personally, yes. Depends on the season, right? When I'm hitting the gym a lot and I'm bulking, VO2 max is gonna go slightly down. VO2 max is a ratio, right?